My dear Wilfred, why do you lie with your legs so ungainly huddled? Your arm across your cold, sullen, exhausted face. It hurts my heart to remember you as such. Siegfried Sassoon, poet, one-time cricketer, proud recipient of the Military Cross. Ha! I threw it in the Mersey. My men knew me as Mad Jack, a moniker earned not without merit, but not as mad as that damned war. Wilfred, why did you go back? What would you say to us today?
Imagine a time out of place, a place where we meet with the players of history's greatest tragedies and our world's greatest comedies. The dead often leave a trail of words. They litter our minds and colour our thoughts. They imprint a version of their time so indelibly into our minds that their time becomes our time. And they reach out to us from the limits of beyond their generation. And so, we meet in places described by history, in the depths of, in the midst of comedy and tragedy, described by history by the pens which brought them alive. And we meet a young man, hunched over his desk. He writes as if life depends upon it.
Dearest mother, I'm writing this in a smoky cellar. The smoke is so thick I can hardly see. This was the last letter I ever wrote to mother. I didn't want to upset her, but I was honest. I was always honest. My final letter I wrote to Siegfried, my dearest friend. Some poems to tempt you to a letter, and I'll give you my mother's address. I know you try to see her
If a question and exclamation on every soldier's lips, carved into the hearts of those who wait. I too had my turn to wait. I am, or was, Vera Brittain, and like our friend Sassoon, it was my fate to wait.
Siegfried, my sweet Siegfried. He taught me a lot in Craig Lockhart. Oh, he could be a bolshy bugger and rather grand, I'd thought. But in that place he brought sweetness, a charge which I know you deny most forcibly. But in that place he brought me back to life with a jolt.
Oh yes, Craig Lockhart. War hospital for nervous disorders. There were some 150 men there at any one time, their minds sucked out by experience, the experience of the front line, which echoed in their dreams, dreams which sang out night after night in the brooding vacuum of this most Gothic of concert halls.
my duty, although Siegfried would think me a fool for it. When we first met, he thought my poems sweet, luscious, he had said. Sing me at morn, but only with your laugh, even as spring that laugheth into leaf. In this sweetness, I could not find myself to walk abroad. The other patients were not off my mind, or else so close to my mind that I could not bear to associate with them. I only sought Siegfried out of curiosity. And it has to be said, a degree of hero worship. But this war was not about heroes, so I could only seek refuge in such sweetness for a limited time.
Sweetness. I knew no sweetness. Christmas 1915, I was waiting for the return of my angel to celebrate the Prince of Peace. Roland, we were born for the dreaming spires, our love entrenched in the stories we shared. As romantic and as lazy as the river in which we punted and drifted on those far-off summer days. You were a boy, just a boy. The raw material for the heroic fictions of politicians, stories we once believed. Roland, it was strange to think that not far away men were being slain ruthlessly. The destruction of men as though beasts, whether they be English, French, German, or anything else. Or my angel. Perhaps someday I shall not shrink in pain to see the passing of another dying year and listen to Christmas songs again, although you cannot hear.
I wrote only of the pity of war, the pity war distilled.
In July this year, after so many years of research about my great-uncle, my lovely family took me to France so that I could see his grave. It was a very sunny, cloudless day when we reached Etaples Military Cemetery. We quickly found where Uncle Lewis was lying, and my grandchildren and I gently placed a poppy wreath and cross in his grave. I also sprinkled some earth and 2 flint stones, which I had collected from his church in St Andrews in June. A little bit of his home will forever be with Uncle Lewis in that now quiet corner of France. Lewis was born in June 1886 in a small hamlet called Ilkeshall St Andrew, which is near Bungay in Suffolk. His parents, James and Emma Biles, named him James Lewis, but was known as Lewis to his family. Lewis had 10 sisters. Childhood would have been very tough for Lewis, and he would have been put to work at an early age to help feed his family. Home was a farm cottage at Blacksmith Common with no mod cons as we know them today. I know he must have had very little schooling, as the copy of his will I have been able to obtain, and which he made in 1918 in the trenches, was signed with a cross. Lewis and his father were farm labourers, and both would have worked long, hard hours in the fields in all weathers. I know he never married, and when war broke out in 1914, Lewis continued his work on the land, helping to feed the nation. In October 1915, a letter from King George V, addressed to my people, was published in the East Suffolk Gazette. The King requested men of all classes to come forward voluntarily and take your share in the fight. Late in 1915, Lewis enlisted with the Suffolk Regiment, and his basic army training began. On the 5th of March 1916, Lewis's battalion made ready to travel to France and embarked on its journey to Havre. The battalion's first taste of action occurred on the 7th of June at Cuinchy. After initial success, the battalion was beaten back to its own lines again and suffered 50 casualties and 8 men killed. At this time, the army generals were planning a big offensive, now known as the Battle of the Somme, which commenced at 7:30 on the 1st of July 1916. I cannot begin to imagine how Lewis and his comrades coped with the dreadful conditions which they were in. Not only did they have to face the cold and wet, which Lewis would have been used to on the farm, but also the dreadful bombing, mud, blood, gas, rats, and such sights of human suffering no man should have to endure. The regiment had suffered so many losses at Ypres that it did not have a full complement of men and were not getting new conscripts to make up its numbers. During the early part of 1918, the generals ordered a reorganisation of the army. After being assimilated into his new battalion, Lewis's next battle was at Lye in April, which was again fought in bitter weather, and it suffered heavy casualties. His new regiment was also involved in the battles of Lye and Aisne in the late spring, and then they moved to Bethune in August. Lewis saw the Somme again in October, and the war ended with him being in Bavay. Uncle Lewis had survived the war, only to be struck down with the flu, and died on the 16th of November 1918 at Etaples Military Hospital. How must his devastated family have felt on receiving news of his death? No wonder they didn't talk about their loss. It must have been indescribable. In my research, I found an entry in the death column of the East Suffolk Gazette, which read as follows: "In fond and loving memory of James Lewis Biles, dearly loved and only son of Mr. and Mrs. J. Biles, St. Andrews, near Bungay, who died from influenza and pneumonia in France, November 16, 1918, aged 32 years. No loved one stood around him to bid a last farewell. No word of comfort could he leave to those he loved so well. But the hardest part is yet to come, when others home return. We shall miss among the cheering crowd the face of our loved one, from his sorrowing mother, father and sisters.
With no disrespect, you hear a lot about the men what died in the war, but you don't hear much about the men what were wounded, and some of them seriously wounded, the lives they led when they come out, how they come and how they had to be looked after and how they were done. You saw some of them and what they suffered and how they were, but you never hear anything about that. I'm Slout Ladbroke, and he's in the 4th Battalion, Royal Norfolks. Now, he was wounded in 1916, and he was wounded in the battlefield. He had his tummy all shot out, and his stomach laid beside him. They stuffed his tummy back in, and they tied a rifle down the front as a splint to hold it, and to hold it, and to hold it together. Time he got back to the hospital, when they got him to a hospital, his inside had all matted and all grown together. And the only thing they could do was to put a plate in to hold his body out in shape, and his body was like that all the while. All his body was always matted together, and that's how he lived. And we had him at home, I wouldn't let him go away, I looked after him, but the last 17, 18 years of his life he lived with me. He had to give up his wasn't in the cottages and come and lived with me, and he lived till he was 90. When there was cottages up, there was the war memorial cottages, they were for the Norfolk Regiment. They were opened in 1922. He was the first resident in there to go in there. And I was born up there.
The dancers during a great battle, 1916. The floors are slippery with blood. The world gyrates too. God is good, that while his wind blows out the light for those who hourly die for us, we can still dance each night. The music has grown numb with death, but we will suck their dying breath, the whispered name they breathed to chance, to swell our music, make it loud, that we may dance, may dance. We are the dull, blind carrion fly that dance and batten, though God die mad from the horror of the light. The light is mad too, flecked with blood. We dance each night.
We danced each night.
God in man revealed. I've seen Christ in no man's land. There, men often hear his voice. I would do my duty, although Siegfried would think me a fool for it. Ah, Siegfried, my sweet Siegfried. A more conscientious soul than I've ever known. And am I not a conscientious objector? Although being an objector of a much seared conscience and a very troubled soul.
I was a nurse, but I was far away from Wilfred during his time convalescing. It seemed very strange to think that I was nursing Hun prisoners, the very boys that my brother and my beloved were doing their best to kill. It just goes to show how absurd it all was. I found Belgium to be a beastly place. Everyone seemed to be on the make, but these shattered, dying boys and I were paying alike for a situation which none of us had desired or done anything to bring about. When the sad days bring you the loss of all ambition, and pride is gone that gave you strength to bear, when dreams are shattered and broken is all decision, turn you to these dependent on your care. They too have fathomed the depths of human anguish, seen all that counted flung like chaff away. The dim abodes of pain wherein they languish offer that peace, for which at last you pray. I found you in a holy place apart, sublime endurance God in man revealed, where mending broken bodies slowly healed my broken heart.
God in man revealed. I've seen Christ in no man's land. There, men often hear his voice.
Calvary near the Onk. The River Onk is the scene of much desperate fighting then. Calvary is the place where Jesus was crucified and means also some dreadful ordeal. A Calvary are the statues, usually life-size, of Christ on the cross that are scattered all over France, often at crossroads. The ones in northern France, like everything and everybody else there, were often shattered by gun and shell fire. One ever hangs where shelled roads part. In this war he too lost a limb, but his disciples hide apart, and now the soldiers bear with him. Near Golgotha strolls many a priest, and in their faces there is a pride that they were flesh-marked by the beast, by whom the gentle Christ denied. The scribes on all the peoples shove and bawl allegiance to the state. But they who love the greater love lay down their life. They do not hate.
My corps of the 8th Battalion, Royal Norfolk Regiment. My father was born in 1913, so we did know his father as a 3-year-old. So his memories really of his father weren't they great. He actually worked his way through the ranks to become an regimental sergeant major, but I believe he'd been offered the position of becoming an officer, and I think then he was about to go on to be like a warrant officer and work up. He was born in 1873 in a village in Norfolk called West Lexham. In fact, I think there was 11 children, farm labourers, and he was in the army. He'd already done something like 24 years in the army. Now, because he'd done that much time in the army, he was what they'd call an old soldier, so he was a lot to do with the training people, soldiers, to go into the First World War. And he was based in North Walsham, went down to Colchester Barracks, I gather, and where he trained men ready to go. I gather he defended in Colchester, wherever it was, a soldier accused of stealing a blanket. In the army, that sort of thing, that's a very big thing, accusation. The soldier attempted to commit suicide or did, but the whole outcome of it, there was a big inquiry or whatever, and my grandfather protecting his men and who came under him. Officers tended to be away from the men, and his men were more important to him. That's what I'm told. Although he was a regimental sergeant major, at the time of being killed, he was acting as a company sergeant major. He actually went over with a company, I think in September 1915. They moved to the front, heavy bombardment and you name it. And that was, as I said, the first day of the Battle of Somme was delayed by 48 hours because of heavy, muddy rain. The bombardment has ceased, and that's the only time they could do it. At about 5:30-ish, what I can understand, him and second lieutenant, or lieutenant, whatever they called him, went forward, leading his men And of course, they were both killed by German machine gunners. Obviously, I gather the attack they started did succeed in what they attempted to do, but my grandfather and Lieutenant, whatever he's, Alderton, obviously buried. I think they moved him, but I gather there's no body because although he's killed by machine gun, the whole area was heavily bombarded by enemy, so never did find a body. But there are bones all over the area because I've been to Flanders.
Many of us will have had family members killed during the dreadful hostilities of the First World War. My father's brother, my uncle, was one such. Ernest Kerrison Jones, 1892 to 1916. A captain in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, he enlisted on August the 22nd, 1914, to serve his country after 3 years at University College, Oxford, reading mathematics. Following a few months' training, he was first sent to serve in Gallipoli in April 1915, prior to joining the forces fighting on the Somme. Ernest was killed on the second day of the Battle of the Somme, July the 2nd, 1916, during an offensive at La Boiselle. He was 24. The Thiepval Memorial is the largest British war memorial in the world. It was designed by the architect Sir Edwin Lutyens and is situated on a hill overlooking the valley of the Somme, not far from the little town of Albert. In such a peaceful area, surrounded by trees and fields, it can be seen for miles. Hard to believe the noise and mayhem that was the Battle of the Somme had occurred there. Ernest's body, along with thousands of others, has never been found and therefore had no known grave. In 2014, I went to visit the area in which he fell. After much research, I learned that his name was on the Thiepval Memorial, along with 73,000 others. I knew also on which pillar to look, but still had great difficulty locating his name. Found at last, I am the first member of his family to go in search of his name. Ernest Kerrison Jones. Rest in peace.
go back.
I would do my duty, although Siegfried would think me a fool for it. Ah, Siegfried, my sweet Siegfried, a more conscientious soul than I have ever known. And am I not a conscientious objector? Although be it an objector with a much seared conscience and a very troubled soul.
An objector tied to duty, but from what is duty born? For king and country, to the glory of God, rang the cries of the dutiful. But there are quieter voices, voices which echo from the heart, from a more complex spirit. There is an abiding beauty which may be appreciated by those who see things as they are and ask for no reward except to see.
Greater love have no man than this.
Have you forgotten yet? The world's events have dragged on since those gag days. Like traffic checked at the crossing of city ways. And that haunted gap in your mind is filled with thoughts that flow. The high-lit heaven of your mind. Taking your peaceful share of time with joy to spare, but the past is just the same. And war is a bloody game. Have you forgotten yet? Look down and swear by the slain of the war that you'll never forget.
May there be of love.